Hello and welcome to the 20th episode of the Pepper Podcast. For those who are returning, welcome back. And if you are new, the Pepper Podcast covers a wide range of spicy events that occur in our daily lives. Two high school students tackle heated topics through discussion. I'm your host, Jay Mehta, and joining me is my co-host, Indy Watanabe. And today's discussion will be regarding the fast fashion industry waste and its disastrous impacts on the environment, economy, and social life. We discard 92 million tons of clothes-related waste each year, which approximately generates 500,000 tons of microplastics. Every year, we are emitting 500,000 tons, 500,000 tons of microplastics each year into the ocean.
Wow.
That
Yes.
is
Yeah.
monstrous. I mean, that is a
Mm.
lot. And on top of that, we have not just environmental issues. We have a lot of economic and social issues that we'll talk about later. So, Andy,
Mhm.
if you want to, I guess, talk about what is fast fashion.
Yeah. Thank you, Jay. Fast fashion, it's okay. It's really a broad term, but it essentially means the fashion industry whose business models rely on cheap and speedy production of low quality clothing that it's advertised to be super cheap, and there's a lot of it. So obviously it appeals to the average everyday consumer, and it's very harmful, not just to the consumer indirectly,
Mm-hmm.
but to other people who have to process the waste that comes out of that, because it's fast fashion. You're not supposed to have it for long.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a
Yeah.
lot of companies that do this. Companies like Zara, H&M, Fashion Nova Shopper. There's a lot of it's a very lucrative field to say the least.
Right.
But
Right.
such a big fact of it is that 1 in 6 people in the world works a fashion related job. That
Right.
is
Right.
huge, right? And Ortega, which is the founder of Inditex, which is the parent company of Zara, and a few other companies, has a
Yeah.
net worth of $77.5 billion.
Mm.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
this is just a
That's
person.
insane.
This is just a single person. A single person has a net worth of $77.5 billion.
Yeah.
They
Yeah. And
own
I think,
a major majority,
sorry.
a majority. Sorry, just to say, they own a major majority, and these big companies own such a big share in the fast fashion
Right.
industry that it makes it very difficult for anybody, any newcomers, to kind of challenge that authority. And so, I guess that relays
Yeah.
into what you're about to say.
Yeah. And I was just gonna say, like, the three main mottos of fast fashion is it's cheap, it's trendy, and it's disposable. And that's, you hit all those points for the people who are buying this, who don't really necessarily look past, oh, I'm just gonna wear this, I'm gonna buy this and wear this. They don't see the implications it costs to make the clothes. Why is it so cheap? And where does it go after I'm done with it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So let's talk about like the history of fast fashion, just so we can put this into context, because it's a pretty widespread issue, especially in today's world.
Yeah.
So during World War II, right, fabrics were rationed because they needed stuff for the troops, and they wanted, everything to be able to function, but without any shortages.
Mm-hmm.
And during this time, people became more accepting of mass-produced clothing and lower working standards. So people were like, okay, so this has spanned into the 1900s as well. However, there's the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, where I believe it's 1946 or 1911, where like 146 workers died in a fire, and they
Mm-hmm.
couldn't get out because the owners like locked them in,
Yeah.
and so they were like they're making shirt waists,
It was
and
the
it's like
Triangle Shirtwaist Factory
right,
fire.
right, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York,
Yeah.
and they couldn't get out, and that really opened uh, the public's eyes to the problem of mass-produced fabrics and like clothing, because whenever you make something super cheap and a lot of it, you cut corners, right? And
Exactly.
you cut corners, and that hurts other people, especially, and this was evident during this fire. And mass production of clothing exploded from the 1960s to the 1990s. Like there were all the like the labor made to make the clothes, and the actual like fabrics were outsourced from different countries to keep the costs lower. And it was in the 1990s that saw the fashion industry to start to develop a new production model to become the fast fashion industry we know today,
Yeah.
right? And it there are so many like hidden costs that like include low wages, right?
Yeah.
Like Jay, which countries have, the most people who are working in fast fashion? Like what
Uh,
types of countries?
Typically, like lower developed or less developed
Right,
countries, or
right,
developing countries that they exploit to do it.
right.
Big ones are, I guess, like people know the term sweatshops, is a very
Hmm.
popular
Hmm.
term to describe these, in which
Yeah,
people work constantly with very little breaks, and are not given a sustainable wage, and just to support their family, just because there's not really a whole like another way for them to support their lifestyle or just support just the necessities that they need to survive. They often have to work these long hours and in these sweatshops to just make some money, not even a living wage. And so this happens in countries like China, India, Indonesia, a lot of some of these developing countries. But then
yeah,
it also has like it happens in these developed countries like India and China and Indonesia. Like these countries are somewhat developed, but they still have factors to them that make them I
yeah.
guess, unique in the aspect of the
Right,
fast fashion industry. And going off
right.
that, 93% of brands are not paying their garment workers a living wage.
Yeah,
That,
yeah,
and taking the fact that, like I said, 1 in 6 people work in like a fashion related job, I think that's pretty substantial.
yeah.
Considering about 100 billion items of clothing are produced each year, and then I think you're about to talk about where it goes.
Yeah. So fast fashion, a lot of the times it okay, so the let's first talk about like the resources put into it first,
Oh
and then
yeah.
we can talk about where it goes because it's such like the whole process is so lengthy and extensive, and there's so many things that even I didn't take into consideration, like water consumption,
Hmm.
right? Textile dyeing uses 25 to 40 gallons of fresh water to produce 2 pounds of fabric.
Yep.
Just think about that. That's insane. That's so much water just to produce 2 pounds of fabric because you need to grow the plant and you need to like dye the plant. You need like the processing water as well.
Hmm.
And cotton is also one of the key materials used in the fashion industry.
Yeah.
And it's where's cotton grown in? It's grown in like very hot
Hot,
and
humid
dry
climates.
countries.
Or
Right.
sorry, hot, dry.
Water is really hard to find. Yet, according to The Guardian, 22,500 liters of water is needed to produce just 1 kilogram of cotton.
Yeah.
1 kilogram of cotton takes 22.5 thousand liters of water. And where water's already scarce, it kind of redirects that water from like natural ecosystems. So that causes drought and indirectly impacts like agriculture and thus it impacts people. It causes droughts and it also causes starvation periods and it just like destroys the natural environment.
Yeah. And
And then that
sorry.
water that's used, no, I'm sorry, but the water that's used, right?
Hmm.
It's there's so much runoff and it's like dumped everywhere that 20% of industrial water pollution comes from the textile industries.
Yeah. Yeah. 20%. 20% of global
Right.
wastewater comes from textile dyeing.
Yep. Yep. And
That's,
that's insane.
yeah,
That's
that is monstrous.
right.
Our global wastewater, just the global wastewater that our whole world produces, 20% of that comes from textile dyeing.
Mhm.
That is ginormous. And that's just the
Yeah.
statistics that I wanted to bring up. Glad you brought
Right.
that up. And then again, that goes into where everything goes. But just before that, like we'll also talk about CO2 consumption. Fast fashion generated more CO2 than aviation and shipping combined. So not only is it wasting a lot of precious water, we talked about water scarcity. It's a topic that we
Right.
talked about previously, not that we're going to talk about in the future. But just the amount of water and CO2, or the amount of
Right.
production necessary that produces CO2,
Yeah.
is greater than the flight and maritime transport of material. Just to
Yeah.
produce that item, it takes double the
Right.
amount, and it produces double the amount of CO2 consumption in comparison to just transporting it. That's
Mhm.
quite saddening to hear, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really interesting you brought that up because like even I like airplanes, they emit so much like greenhouse gases, which obviously contributes to global warming and climate changes and all those things and changing changing landscapes around the world over time.
Mm-hmm.
But like just I never thought that fast fashion in and of itself would contribute more to that and shipping combined. Because to me, like the amount of gas a plane uses is a lot,
Yeah.
right? It excretes a lot of those harmful greenhouse gases. But I just never really thought that fast fashion would be such a prominent factor in contributing to global carbon emissions.
Yeah. It's bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's what's really bad about fast fashion, especially, is the way it's endorsed, right?
Mm-hmm.
We already talked about how it's supposed to be cheap, it's supposed to be plentiful, and it's supposed to be trendy. Trendy is probably one of the most like impactful things because you have people like Kim Kardashian or someone who wears these like fast fashion trendy clothes and it influences the way other people see fashion like oh this celebrity is wearing this brand or this type of clothing, this look. I want to go for that too because I also want to be considered like a fashion icon, or
Yeah.
I also want to be considered uh, eloquently dressed or rich, right?
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to kind of stop that because it's hard because like they make these, like they partner with them to endorse them, they pay them. It's all fueled by money.
Yeah.
And it's just it causes like shifts in the social environment when it comes
Exactly.
to like especially secondhand clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something been wanting to talk about for a while. Secondhand clothes like Goodwill. Have you been to Goodwill recently, Jay?
I think I went a few months ago.
Yeah, okay. So Goodwill back then, like a few years ago when fast fashion wasn't as mainstream, it was a place where you can go get secondhand clothes that was pretty cheap and affordable. However, now it's a trend to go get secondhand clothes. So it not only increases the price of like secondhand uh, clothing items, but it also takes away those outlets for people of lower income who
Mm-hmm.
rely on the second hand clothing for like literal clothing. It,
Yeah.
it takes away from them. They can buy less, and what's left is just like a bunch of people going just because it's a trend to buy secondhand. And it's really sad because I think that buying secondhand should be encouraged. However, because people or companies have seen trends in secondhand clothes buying, they've raised their prices to take advantage of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And it's a good point that you mentioned, like the social construct of
Right.
trendiness, and how that's really affected our society. Not just teenagers; it's affected adults as well.
Mhm.
And so you a lot
Right.
of like just using like TikTok as an example, because just for our generation and just like younger people in general.
Yeah.
TikTok has like a lot of people. If you ever like get onto the quote unquote fashion side of TikTok, where you see like
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
that scream old money, things that scream like
Right. Right. I've
like
seen it too. I've seen that
rich,
too.
like
Yeah.
those kinds of, and a lot of those companies that they advertise are fast fashion industries, that
Right.
are very not sustainable. And I forgot to mention Shein. Shein is a big one.
Yes.
They Shein is
Yes.
advertised quite a bit, and there's tons and tons of other products that just are advertised, and like people that think just like let me get this just because it's cheap, because it's trendy, and because it looks good.
Yeah.
And so if you know me, like personally, I rarely buy clothes. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love
Same.
free college t-shirts. If any colleges are listening, please send me a free t-shirt. I would wear it. But I am big on not limiting my buying of clothes because
Right.
I understand that it holds very negative environmental impacts. It's very, very non-sustainable, especially in the trend of buying secondhand items and constantly buying new items is something that's very trendy and is very kind of lucrative. And
Yeah.
not to mention, like, if something is necessary and if I need to get something, yes, I'll get that. But
Yeah.
I'm not going to, just because something is trendy does not mean that it's necessary, right?
Right. Right.
And
I
so
agree.
that kind of that mindset of trendiness leads to waste. And
Yeah.
so this increased waste is only just contributing to a worsened
Right.
climate that we're having. Like I said, half a
Right.
million tons of microplastics. And then
Yeah.
also returns. Returns are huge. So returns of items bought online exceed the amount of all purchased goods.
Yeah.
Just let that sink in.
Yeah.
Those that people that return items online exceed the amount of all goods purchased.
Yeah.
That's
That's
insane.
insane. Yeah.
Just returns. That's very bad. Because
Yeah.
what's going to happen when that item is returned? It just sits in shipping until somebody else buys it again. And if nobody buys it, it's going to be thrown away, therefore
Yeah.
contributing to the cycle that we have. And then, like you said, I think you're about to go into where it goes. And I've been waiting on this for
Yeah.
so long because I have so many statistics for this.
Right. So obviously we know like throwing away clothes isn't ideal, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle. So you try to reuse that, but unfortunately that's not the case for most people.
Yeah.
So a lot of the waste that's we have for fast fashion, it actually goes into like the obviously it goes into landfills where it leaks into the ground, and like the rain, and it rains on it, and then it just leaks into the ground, contaminates water supplies, destroys ecosystems and all that. However, there's another like kind of hidden place that fast fashion waste goes. And for example, Ghana. And Ghana is one of those places where a lot of waste is sent because,
Mm-hmm.
they're a third world country, and they're developing country, excuse me. But it's supporting an invisible like salvage market that sees like American clothes waste ships to faraway countries where it fills marketplaces. And like there's all over the beaches, it's like clogged everywhere, and like dumps are in their country, their own country. Our clothes, you get American clothes in their country,
Yeah.
right? And we donate clothes to charity a lot when they're finished. So we think, oh, we're doing good. Yes, we're doing good. But with the increasing amount of items being discarded and the poor quality of fast fashion, less and less can be resold and used. And so millions of garments are put into bales and shipped abroad every year. Like I know Indonesia, especially, they get a lot of like recycled things. Like
Yeah.
they get recycled and shipped to them, which is the same thing with fast fashion waste. It gets shipped to them and they get paid, but like so they can salvage it there. But most of that does end up like in giant dumps, a lot of times near beaches.
Yeah.
It's a long and complicated supply chain, and it's really not very like transparent to the average person who consumes this stuff. But even people like who go through it, like in those countries where those things are happening, they see it as normal. Like it's just another way that they can make a living. But they also don't see like the negative effect that's happening on their health, on their ecosystem, and just in their like in their world. It's really sad.
Yeah. And just to mention that, like, just some statistics, we discard 92 million tons of clothes each year. 92 million tons of clothes related waste each year. And on top of that, just going off like the previous stuff that we've mentioned about like clothing sales and all. So, clothing, like the amount of clothing production has doubled, but the garment usage lifetime has decreased. So,
Right.
the amount of like the average number of times an item was worn decreased by 36% overall from like a 2000 to 2015 study.
Right.
And then clothing sales doubled from 100 to 200 billion units a year. And of course, that's varying, especially now because that's like right now is 7 years after the time of that.
Yeah.
But it was a
Yeah.
15-year study. And so I feel like that has merit. And especially now in a 2019 Guardian poll, 1 in 3 women, young women, the biggest segment of consumers, consider garments worn once or twice to be old.
Yeah. Yeah.
This thinking contributes to this constant ideology that if something's old, it should be thrown away. And
Mhm. Yeah.
because of it, the average American throws away around 81 pounds of clothing yearly. Clothing
Yeah.
that could be given to Goodwill, given to secondhand stores, that can be better accessed by people that need them. And or
Yeah.
even if people want to contribute to this, buy secondhand idea, giving clothes that you don't need, continuing this cycle, right? That's a
Yeah.
very important part of it.
Right.
if you buy something, buy something from a secondhand store, I think it is helpful to
Right.
return an item, right? To
Right.
maintain the balance in which people can buy and sell and continue to kind of regulate the amount of inventory that people have. But
Hmm.
companies will still, at the end of the day, jack up the price of everything
Right.
for
Right.
capitalist use.
For
But
profit. Right. Yes.
exactly. But some like companies or some nonprofit organizations will do things to honestly help people that need them, right? So if you do
Yeah.
your research, if you find where you want to, put your money in, I think it's important
Yeah.
that you figure out where you're putting your stuff, like where you're putting all your secondhand clothes in and putting all the clothes you want to donate and just textile related items. Where are you going to put them? You should probably
Yeah.
research into that.
Yeah. And okay, like I think that fast fashion does definitely cause problems,
Hmm.
right? But it's also important to analyze like arguments for fast fashion because I also recognize that people don't have the luxury to buy into like slower fashion or make their own clothes or buy things that aren't literally cheap, right? And we can't just tell people to go thrifting instead, right? Because
Hmm.
it's already so expensive. Not everyone has access to thrift stores, as we know, and not everyone has time to sift through an abundance of clothes that, might not even fit and pay for it with something that like they don't make much, right?
Yeah.
So like I think it's really complicated to it's not you can't just like tell people, oh, you can't don't just buy into fast fashion because some people actually do rely on that as their sole like way of getting clothes. And clothes are essential, right?
Yeah.
That's why fast fashion is such an important and large problem. Is because so many we all buy clothes, right? Because we all use it. And so people who don't have access to that, like they tend to buy into fast fashion more, which I'm not gonna blame them for because you literally have to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just like again what you said, just echoing the negative effects of fast fashion in Ghana, like I said, these are just some stats from Ghana. Um, it is estimated that 40% of all the clothing bales sent to Ghana end up in landfills. And some of the unsold clothes wash out to the beaches, and when it rains, they create massive tangle webs called tentacles in the sand. And it's so hard for like the people of these countries to deal with these cleanups because especially in say like for example Bangladesh,
Hmm.
right? A lot of governmental regulations on hygiene as well as on just like labor in general, it's very corrupt.
Yeah.
There's not much checking that goes on there. There's
Yeah.
not much accountability. And so a lot of countries in the US, while a lot have also taken strides to sustainability, making it more transparent for their consumers to see where they get their stuff from, they also exploit these countries without us knowing, right? They exploit these countries' governments and the people because they know that the people are powerless and the governments won't do anything because they're helping pay the government and they're undercutting their and underpaying their garment workers. And it's really sad because just like the New York factory fire, accidents happen in these factories all the time,
Yeah.
and a lot of them go unreported. Like there's some examples I remember seeing when I was like 12 or at 10 of like people who had bought handbags or something or bought shirts and there were like handwritten notes of like help me
Yeah.
in like
Yeah.
either other languages or just like pleas for help that they don't feel safe coming out or standing up for themselves because they know that they have no other choice and their situation is dire.
Yeah.
It's really painful to think about.
It's really sad to see that. Like, not
Yeah.
even mentioning economic things. Like, we're seeing like dramatic impacts that these jobs have on its direct people that are
Mm.
working them, and this kind of sweatshop mentality is not very
Right.
helpful in the sense where it's very, very detrimental
Right.
to people's well-being. And so it's very hard, because we're not there. So we can't really find out what things are like in those areas. But
Yeah.
there's also like an issue of gender equality where like 68%
Yeah.
of fast fashion brands don't maintain gender equality at production facilities. So
Yeah.
80 million workers are overwhelmingly women, but like the majority of retailers show little to no concern with like maintaining equality in the workplace. So it's not a sustainability problem, but also like a feminist issue. So
Right.
there's a lot of problems within fast
I agree.
fashion, but like you said, like we can't completely blame fast fashion because it has helped people uh, like just find clothing because that's all that they can rely on. So I
Right.
understand in those aspects, but it's definitely a challenging issue. But I think there could
Yeah.
be definitely more
So,
regulation
yeah.
into like pushing for less production and increased, I guess, ideas on how like because we already have so many clothes right now just in like inventory of like Goodwill and just in the market in general. And so getting those clothes kind of used up almost in the sense where it's like it's not fast fashion anymore and where it's actually something where people use them and then give them to somebody else that uses them. That constant usage would decrease environmental use, and this is just my personal opinion on it, but like
Yeah.
it would decrease environmental use and then also be a lot more sustainable. And also another factor is like 500 billion, I think, yeah, more than 500 billion dollars of value is lost every year due to clothing
Yeah.
underutilization and lack of recycling. That's a lot of money, it
I
could
agree.
also save people a lot of money. I know clothing isn't cheap. Even in
Right.
fast fashion, clothing is still not cheap.
Yeah.
So especially when you're buying new outfits constantly, maybe once every week or once every 2 weeks, it adds up significantly. And so
Yeah.
maybe going out and just buying used clothes, but at a reasonable price where you're not
Mhm.
jacking up the price of other things, being sustainable and thrifty with your money while also being sustainable with the environment and
Yeah.
also taking into consideration for other people, I think is the
Yeah. And
biggest.
yeah, no, I completely agree. And even I have problems with fast fashion. Like I'll see something, I'll be like, ooh, that looks cool. But like at the end of the day, like, is it worth it? Right? Like
Exactly.
you have to put yourself in a mindset, which is hard for a lot of people because a lot of times we live in the moment, we live for instant gratification. It's hard to think in the future. So some possible ways that we can reduce the impacts of fast fashion would be to shop at like sustainable and eco-friendly fashion brands that we know. Like if we look in, that have posted their
Yeah.
transparency agreements and have committed to sustainability and transparency. Like buying from those companies definitely will help. And just if the U.S. government or just like world governments in general enforced sustainable practices or like sign with companies that um, practice sustainable practices with people where they were getting their where they were getting their resources from,
Yeah,
that would definitely help as well.
I
And
agree.
if we're talking about like environmental, right? A lot of new clothes when bought initially is full of chemicals. So I saw something that said just wash your clothes when you get it new because it takes away a lot of those harmful chemicals.
Yeah.
And while it does go into like wherever your washing machine water goes, that gets treated. So it's better than just sitting in a landfill and like all that leaching into the ground directly. And a lot of these clothings that we need to be shifting towards, we as in like people who have the luxury to afford it, right?
Yeah.
And like the fast fashion problem is mostly prominent with people who can afford higher quality clothes to buy higher quality clothes from sustainable companies, because while higher quality clothes is more expensive, in the long run it lasts longer, it
Hmm.
reduces its impact on the environment, and it's just overall better for you
Yeah.
and for other people and people from across the world,
Yeah.
right?
And
Yeah.
and like you said, like the textile sector still represents 10 to 20% of pesticide use. So yeah, like you did, you're right. Like there is still a
Yeah.
lot of like pesticides and chemicals that are still on your material. And then
Right.
also, I think nearly 70 million barrels of oil are used each year to make the world's polyester
Yeah.
fiber. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
takes 200 more than 200 years to decompose, and so it
Hmm.
also like makes a lot of creates a lot of microplastics on top of that. So, like you said, being sustainable with your stuff, and just
Right.
being cautious and just being understanding, I think is the biggest part of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And I think that also, like, with thinking about this problem comes a change in mindset. So just take the time whenever you're buying new clothes to just think about its impact or where it comes from
Yeah,
and how like often you will actually use it. Because a lot of times I end up buying clothes and I just use it a few times and I just forget about it, right? But I'm trying to work on that now. It's also a growing process for me.
yeah.
So it's just that mindset. Yeah. And with that, our discussion comes to an end. We thank you for listening and hope you'll stay tuned for future episodes. Don't forget to follow the Pepper Podcast on Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Google Podcasts. Thank you.
Thank you.